This might have been the most unbelievable game of the match, Danny. This needs to be
Absolute
studied by
backbreaker.
everybody who wants to learn something about chess.
Rarely, the crowd is finally happy. Danny finally doesn't know what to say.
I think after that intro, there's nothing left for me to do but show you this exceptional game. So Magnus Carlsen, reigning world champion, he's got the white pieces here. Fabiano Caruana, former world number 2, he's got black. This is the Speed Chess Championship, an online event played a couple months ago. It's the quarterfinals, and this is the part of the tournament where they've got 3 minutes and 1 second increment on the clock. So they get a second back every move. Let's see what happened. So we had e4 from Magnus, e5 from Fabi. Now we get the Roy Lopez on the board, or Spanish game with bishop to b5. And now the pawn kicks back this bishop. And if you take here, by the way, the trick is that after white wins a pawn, you win it straight back with queen to d4, double attacking those pieces. So the most common move at grandmaster level is dropping that bishop back. Now we see knight to f6. Castles was played, and now the main move here for black is bishop to e7. But in this game we see pawn b5 immediately, the bishop drops back, and this is the start of what's called the archangel variation. So the main line is going bishop to b7, but the modern twist on this opening is bishop to c5. You leave this one at home, and so you leave some flexibility. Will it fianchetto, or will it come here or here later in the game? Now, one thing to note when black goes bishop c5 is you do have to be mindful that white has this tactic, taking here and then pushing with d4. But practice has shown that actually black's doing okay in these positions, different game, but okay, worth knowing if you're going to look into this opening. But in this game, we see a4 played by Magnus, so nibbling away at those queenside pawns. Fabi now moves the rook, so there's a pin down the a file here, he had to protect that rook. So now we see an exchange, the pawn recaptures, d3 was followed by d6, and now c3 from Magnus, preparing to push d4, standard idea, and now castles played. Both players make some room for their kings, also take away these squares from the bishops, and Magnus starts to activate his rook. Bishop back to b6, starts to clear the way for this c pawn to move in future, also anticipates d4. The knight develops here, and now this knight drops back, and it's starting a common remaneuver as I'm drawing on the board, which also then frees the way for the c pawn. Knight f1 played, so white goes on their standard journey. The knight comes to g6, knight g3, and now rook e8 played, and all these rook and knight moves, they're all geared up to protecting these pawns and preparing to then push d pawns in the future potentially. d4 now played immediately by Magnus. The bishop comes to b7, and that's 3 pieces now converging on e4. So here white has to react, and that's why Magnus drops back the bishop, protects that pawn again. c5 played, striking at the heart of the position. And there are different moves here. You could go d5, close the position, but we'll stick with the game here. Magnus captures, pawn takes back. We see the queens coming off the board, and the bishop develops to e3. So both players have now completed development here. And what we note about this position is it's not imbalanced at all. The pawn structure is symmetrical on both sides of the board. The minor pieces symmetrical for both sides. White's got the A file, but black's got the D file. Both can be challenged. So the question becomes, can one player outfox the another through their maneuvers? So Fabi starts with bishop to c8 here. He underdevelops that piece, but he's spinning it around to a more centralized square. Now knight f5 from Magnus, and you don't want to go capturing this one because after pawn recaptures, not only have you given up the bishops, which you generally want to hold on to if you can, but once the knight moves, well, this pawn would be dropping. So instead the bishop just bounces into e6, rook a6 invades, hits this piece, and now the bishop drops back, kicks the rook out, then it comes back again. This is tantamount to a draw offer from Fabi, but Magnus plays on. He's got the white pieces he wants to press. And now a pair of rooks get exchanged. This one recaptures. And now there's a threat here from white to go knight to d6, and Fabi's a little bit reactive to Magnus's threat. So the best move here when you run it with the engine is pawn to b4. They also like rook a8 coming to the open file, but knight e8 was played to stop the knight jump, but Magnus just gets a small initiative now. So he takes that open file. Fabi goes f6 to cover this e5 pawn, prepares to then move this g6 knight if needed, and Magnus goes h4, a classic kind of squeezing move. Now king f7, the pawn kicks on, the knight drops back, and this one now jumps, supports its brother, or you could say sister, I always say brother, I think of them as brothers. This one captures, the knight takes back, and now this is an interesting moment. Fabi gives up bishop for knight. You didn't have to do this. c4 was a possibility, although then the bishops would get exchanged, and after rook recaptures, you do get a rook invasion on a7, checking the king, looks a bit scary, and if you're not going c4 and you're not exchanging bishop for knight here, well, what are you doing? Because the pieces are a bit restricted. So that's why Fabi dives in now, gives this one up, because at least it allows him to activate his knight. Now we get a couple of king moves, and then the knight hits d6, and it's a really nice defensive octopus from this 6th rank. When the knights are on the 3rd rank, they're attacking octopuses, especially if they can be supported by pawns, and vice versa for the white player. So look out for knights on the 6th and 3rd rank. They're often very effective on those ranks. Now we see rook a6, so pressures that bishop. The knight comes to c4, hits this bishop, drops back, defends the b2 pawn, and now knight d6 comes back, anticipates b3, we get king e2, and Fabi's now marching this king all the way over to the queen side. b3 played, prophylactic against this knight jump. Now king c7, bishop d3, king b7, the rook drops back, and Fabi now forces this exchange down the a file. Magnus takes off, the king recaptures, and now an interesting positional moment. So Magnus could go c4 here, it's the top engine move, and he plays it on the next move, and it's a logical idea that you want to lock this c pawn in place and therefore lock the bishop out of the game. But he starts with pawn to g4 here, and Fabi now misses the opportunity to go pawn c4 himself. That was the best move, opening his bishop, but he plays this one a bit too casual. He's under a minute now, and he struggles in the time pressure more than Magnus does. Now we see the pawn come to c4, so Magnus doesn't need asking twice. He cements the dark squared bishop, Fabi captures, and again an instructive moment. How would you recapture this pawn here? Well, the right way to take back is with the bishop, because if you take with the pawn, the problem is all your pawns are sat on light squares, so even though you've got a bishop pair here, this light squared bishop is looking like a big pawn really. It's stuck defending this one. The knight's actually outplaying this minor piece. So instead, bishop takes back, right move, and now Fabi's decision here is a bit dubious. So he decides to chop off this powerful piece which can kind of maneuver around, especially in blitz, for the bishop. Pawn recaptures. Now he would have been okay if he now played bishop to d8, but he does not play that move, and we'll see the importance of that move in just a moment, because can you guess after king c6 what Magnus played in this position here? Now he's known as the endgame greatest of all time, or at least he is in everyone I talk to, and these are the kind of GOAT moves that make him that sort of player, especially how he does it in this time pressure situation. So the move that Magnus Carlsen played here was pawn to g5. Looks impossible because it can be captured by 2 pawns. Now we do see the h pawn capture that one. There's a threat of course to take here and then bishop win a pawn. If you take with this one, well this is a lot worse, because after bishop recaptures you can't bring the bishop to d8 as we see in the game, or it will get captured. And by the way, the obvious, well why can't black take the bishop? You can see the eval bar shoot up. Here's the move, pawn to f6. Now that one's about to go through and create a queen, or do it like this, whatever. But after captures, then you push this pawn, and it's an unstoppable threat. Really, really thematic. So coming back to the game, the h pawn captured, bishop takes, now this bishop drops back, and Magnus retreats, saves his bishop. And you might think, what's the big deal? You've just traded pawn for pawn here. Well, here's the problem. Now white's gearing up to go pawn h6, and more importantly, once you clear these 2 pawns, you're clearing a route for your king to march into the position. So king d6 played. Now here comes the white king. Bishop a5, so Fabi wants to bounce around like this, defend the c-pawn, that then frees up his king. King g4, bishop c3, now the pawn kicks on, we see captures, king comes, bishop d4, and Magnus takes. Takes this pawn. Of course, you don't take the bishop because you give black a passed pawn. So takes here played, and equally, Fabi doesn't take this one. The pawn endgame is lost because after captures, just to show this, you might think that after e4, actually black is doing well, but the problem is you can't actually hold on to this pawn. But white has to do it in the right way. If you go king g6, looks obvious, you're now losing because black goes king e5, and where do you go to actually hold on to your g-pawn because you can't step here? So you lose, you've lost the opposition. So what you should do is go king g7, for example, and now black can't hold on to the pawn. If they come here or here, it doesn't matter. Then you step g6, now the black king has to give ground, now you win the pawn endgame. Very instructive. So coming back here, that's why Fabi didn't take. Instead, king e7, Magnus goes king g7, keeps that opposition, and now Fabi just doesn't have a move. If the king moves, he loses the pawn. If the bishop moves, he loses this c pawn. So he pushes on with e4, and now Magnus goes into reverse. He's marching back round to win this one. King e8 played, here comes the king. Now when you run this with the engine, it's saying that the position is level even after white wins this pawn, which was unavoidable. And the idea seems to be that if you liquidate, say, two pairs of pawns, then you've got one left and you can try and give up this bishop for pawn, then it would be a draw. However, in practice, with the time pressure, this is very tough. So the king comes to f3, and this is a sneaky move from Magnus, because now Fabi steps in. He didn't have much better though, to be honest, and he has to give up this pawn in exchange for this pawn. But it makes things so difficult because now you've got this pass pawn running, and it's not easy to keep tabs on this f pawn. So king e3 from Magnus. Here comes the black king. King d3 hits the bishop, it bounced around here, and now we see the bishop offering the exchange. This is Fabi's problem. He can't let them come off because the pawn endgame is lost. So he drops back here, and now king c3. Look at the march of this king. f5 played, king b4, king d7, and it marches right into the position, bishop h2, and king d5, dominating the black king. The bishop bounces back, pawn c5 played, bishop a5, and now check, the king goes, and this bishop centralizes some more. The threat is to go pawn here, so the bishop bounces back, hits this f-pawn, Magnus saves it, now bishop a5, and after bishop d6 check, king e8, king e6, now we have resignation. Again, look at the domination of the black king. And why did Fabi resign? Well, this pawn's about to drop. Say you kick on to save it. I mean, you could still capture it, but more importantly, you can even go c7. Now, the black king is cut off, so you'd have to give your bishop, and this is just a completely lost endgame. You soon win the pawn, and then this one runs through. If you want to see another incredible game played in this match, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.